The phone rang before I even set my suitcase down. I hadn't taken my coat off, hadn't turned on more than one light. 2 weeks away, caring for my sister in Macon, and Atlanta still smelled like home the second I walked through that door. Dust on the windowsill, the hum of the refrigerator, all of it familiar. Then the phone rang, and something in my chest tightened before I even looked at the screen. My name is Lois Wardlow, 58 years old, born and raised not far from where I was standing that night. And I've learned in all those years that a phone ringing at the wrong hour rarely brings good news. Alton. I almost let it go to voicemail. We didn't talk much, him and me, pleasant enough at holidays, distant the rest of the year. But something told me to pick it up. Lois. His voice was flat, not worried. Flat, like a man reading off a grocery list. You better find your unstable daughter. She's been missing 10 days now. I stood there in my coat, keys still in my hand, and for a second, the words didn't arrange themselves into anything I could understand. Unstable. Missing. 10 days. Unstable? I said. Alton, what are you talking about? Where is she? I don't know, Lois. She's been unstable for a while now. You know how she gets. I did not know how she gets. My daughter had never been unstable a day in her life. She called me every Sunday. She sent me pictures of her garden. 2 weeks ago, she'd laughed so hard on the phone with me about a mix-up at her job that she'd had to catch her breath. Did you call the police? I asked him, and I heard my own voice come out steadier than I felt. There was a pause. Not a grieving pause, a calculating one. She's not my business, he said. I let those words sit in the air between us because I needed to hear them again in my own head before I could believe a husband had actually said them about his wife. She's not your business, I repeated back to him, slow, so he'd have to hear it too. Look, I got things going on, he said, like I'd asked him to run an errand. I figured you'd want to know. I wanted to ask him what things could possibly matter more than his wife being missing for 10 days. I wanted to ask him why I was hearing this now, on day 10, instead of day 1. But I've lived 58 years learning when to push and when to go quiet and watch. And something in his voice, that boredom, that irritation, like I was the inconvenience, told me this wasn't a moment for pushing. I'll handle it, I said, and I hung up before he could say another word. I stood in my living room a long time after that, coat still on, suitcase still by the door, the house so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. That word he'd used circling back on me over and over, unstable, as if he'd rehearsed it, as if it was already the answer he planned to give anybody who asked. Before I go further, if you're watching this, drop where you're tuning in from tonight. I want to know who's sitting with me through this one, because it's about to get heavy. My daughter is not unstable. My daughter is careful, precise, the kind of woman who color codes her calendar and calls if she's running 10 minutes late. A man who's been married to her for 4 years does not get to decide, in one flat phone call, that finding her isn't his business. Something about the way he said it, not scared, not sorry, just done, sat wrong in my stomach in a way I couldn't yet explain. I didn't call the police first. I called my brother. Garrison picked up on the second ring, and before he could even finish saying my name, I said the only thing that mattered. Something's wrong with Delphine, and I don't think anybody's been looking for her the way they should. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold in front of me, going over every word Alton had said until the words stopped making sense. By morning, I'd already decided. I wasn't waiting on him to do right by my daughter. I drove straight to her street. Mrs. Yancey next door was out watering her plants when I pulled up, and she didn't wait for me to ask. I saw them fighting, she said, before I'd even gotten out the car good. Loud. Real loud. Delphine walked out with her bag, got in a car, and that was that. Figured she just needed some air. How many days ago was that? I asked her. Had to be near 2 weeks now. 2 weeks, not 10 days. The math sat wrong in my stomach, but I kept my face still, thanked her, and drove to the police station before I let myself think too hard on it. The detective who came out to speak with me introduced himself as Detective Halloway. And from the first handshake, I could tell he'd already made up his mind about this visit before I opened my mouth. Ma'am, I understand you're worried, he said, sliding a folder across the desk he hadn't even opened. But your daughter's an adult. She left on her own. Witnesses confirm that. There's no law says a grown woman has to tell anybody where she's going. 10 days, detective. No calls, no texts. Nothing to her own mother. Folks go quiet after a bad fight sometimes. Doesn't mean something happened to her. He said it gentle enough, but there was no give in it. We don't open an investigation on a missing adult unless there's evidence of foul play. Right now, I got a witnessed argument and a woman who walked out under her own power. That's not a case. That's a marriage. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to tell him he didn't know my daughter, that she'd never in her life gone 10 days without calling me. Fight or no fight. But I've learned that anger in a police station gets you labeled, not helped. So I nodded, thanked him for his time, and left with his card in my purse and nothing else. Alton called me that evening, and this time his voice had softened into something almost convincing. I've been so worried, Lois, he said. I haven't been sleeping. I keep checking my phone. I said nothing for a moment, just listened to how careful he sounded now, how different from the flat, bored voice on the first call. A man doesn't find his worry 3 days late. He performs it once he realizes somebody's watching. I'm sure she'll turn up, he added. And there was something underneath those words I couldn't name yet, something that didn't match a man whose wife had vanished. I hung up and sat with that feeling a long while. I thought about calling Delphine's job, her friends, anybody who might have heard from her. I was reaching for my phone to start when it rang in my hand, and Garrison's name lit up the screen. Lois. His voice was tight, controlled in a way I recognized from him. The voice he used when something didn't sit right. I need to see you in person, tonight, if you can. What is it? Not over the phone, he said. I found something. I'll come to you. I told him to come straight over, and I sat by that window until his headlights turned onto my street, my tea gone cold beside me for the second time in 2 days. Garrison didn't sit down when he came in. He stood by my kitchen counter with his jacket still on, like a man who hadn't decided yet whether he was staying. I want to say this the right way, he started, so you understand what this is and what it isn't. Just tell me, Garrison. This isn't a bureau case, Lois. I got no jurisdiction here, no case file, nothing official. What I'm about to tell you, I found on my own time. Calling in favors I probably shouldn't be calling in. As your brother, not as an agent. I nodded slow, because I understood what he was protecting, himself, his job, and me, from getting my hopes tied to something that couldn't hold up. All right, I said. Then talk to me as my brother. He pulled out a chair then and sat across from me, and something in the way he lowered himself into it told me whatever was coming. He'd been carrying it since before he walked through my door. First thing, he said, Alton and his daddy. The way they're carrying themselves since this started, it's wrong. I've sat across enough scared families to know what real worry looks like, and what I'm seeing from those two isn't it. Too smooth, too rehearsed. He was different on the phone last night, I said. Softer, like he'd practiced it. That's exactly what I mean. Garrison's jaw tightened. Second thing. Took me most of yesterday, but I finally got a woman who used to work with Delphine to talk to me. She told me Delphine came in one day months back with a bruise on her wrist, wore long sleeves for a week after, wouldn't talk about it. Brushed it off as clumsy when anybody asked. My stomach dropped, and for a moment I couldn't find words at all. My daughter had never told me a thing about any bruise, any long sleeves, any silence. Why wouldn't she tell me that? I said, more to myself than to him. Because she probably didn't want you to worry, Lois. Women do that. Especially our women. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, and for the first time all night he looked unsure of himself. There's one more thing. But I want to be honest with you. This one's just a feeling, not something I can prove. I saw a post on her page, something about needing space, starting fresh. Something about it didn't sit right with me. The way it was worded. But I could be reaching. I don't want to build something out of nothing. What do you mean? Didn't sit right? I can't put my finger on it exactly. Just enough years reading people's words for a living to know when something feels off. He shook his head slightly, like he didn't fully trust his own instinct on that last piece. I'm telling you anyway because I'd rather you have it and we figure out later if it means anything, than sit on it and be wrong for keeping it from you. I sat with everything he'd given me. The performance, the bruise, and this last uncertain thread he himself wasn't sure of. And felt the ground shift under a story I'd been halfway convincing myself might be true. She left. She needed space. Maybe she'd come back on her own time. That story didn't have as much room left in it now. What do we do? I asked him. We don't do anything yet, Garrison said. Not yet. If they think for 1 second we're on to them, whatever they're hiding gets buried deeper or worse. I need you to be a grieving mother right now, Lois. Not a suspicious one. I looked at him a long moment, feeling something cold and steady settle into my chest, where the panic had been sitting all week. Then I'll watch, I said, and I'll wait. But not for long. I brought a casserole to Alton's door 2 days later, the way any grieving mother-in-law might. Chicken and rice, still warm, wrapped in a dish towel I'd had for 20 years. It gave me a reason to be there. It gave me a reason to stay a while. You didn't have to do that, he said, opening the door wider than I expected. I know I didn't. I stepped past him before he could decide whether to invite me in. But I couldn't sit at home doing nothing. The house looked the same as it always had, except for the mail. A small stack of it sat unopened on the counter, 3 or 4 days' worth by the look of it. A man waiting on his wife to come home doesn't let mail pile up like that. He checks every piece, hoping one of them is from her. How are you holding up? I asked him, setting the dish down. Getting by. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the dish, like he was deciding whether he even wanted to eat it. Been better. I let the silence sit a moment. The way I used to when Delphine was small and I wanted her to fill a quiet space with the truth instead of what she thought I wanted to hear. Alton didn't fill it. He moved to the sink and ran water over a glass that was already clean. Have the police called you? I asked. Given any updates? Nothing new? He set the glass down harder than the question called for. They're treating it like she just walked off. Like it's nothing. Isn't that what you told me, though? That she's been unstable? He turned around then, and for just a second, something crossed his face that wasn't grief. It was closer to irritation, the kind a man gets when he's been asked the same question one too many times. I said what I said, Lois. I nodded, softened my face, let him believe I was just a worried mother grasping for anything to make sense of this. I walked slow through his living room, taking in what I could without looking like I was taking in anything at all. A jacket that wasn't his hung over a chair, a set of keys on the table that didn't match his car. "Whose keys are these?" I asked, light as I could make it. "My father's." He said it too fast, then caught himself. "He's been coming by, helping out." "Helping how?" "Just around the house. Things that need fixing." He picked the keys up off the table and slid them into a drawer, out of sight, like he hadn't meant for them to be seen at all. He said he had somebody go take care of a door situation for me. "Nothing you need to worry about." A door situation. I said nothing right then. Kept my face soft and tired the way a grieving mother's face should look. But something in me went very still and very quiet, the way it does right before a thing becomes clear. "That's kind of him," I said instead. "Ambrose always did like to keep busy." "Yeah." Alton looked at me a beat too long, like he realized he'd said more than he meant to. "You should head on home, Lois. It's getting late." I let him walk me to the door, thanked him for his time, and drove 2 streets before I pulled over and sat with my hands still on the wheel, turning that one sentence over in my mind until it stopped sounding like nothing at all. A door situation. I called my cousin Patrice the next morning, the one who still went to the same church as Ambrose's people, the one who knew everybody's business whether she meant to or not. "Girl, I haven't seen you in ages," she said, and I let her talk a minute before I steered things where I needed them to go. "You still close with the Norwood side?" I asked. "Ambrose and them?" "Close as anybody gets with Ambrose." Something shifted in her voice, careful in a way I recognized. "Why you askin' about him?" I almost told her everything right then. It sat right there on my tongue. The door situation, the keys, the way Alton's face had changed when he said his father's name. But something held me back. Some old instinct that knew the fewer people carrying this, the safer it stayed. "Just making conversation," I said instead. "Man's been coming around helping Alton with things since Delphine's been gone." Patrice laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "That man don't help nobody without getting something back. You remember what he did to his own sister? Or, I think it was his sister. Might have been a cousin, honestly. It was so long ago, but everybody tells it the same way." "Tell me the way you heard it." "Something about convincing her to sign her house over to him for estate planning. Some mess like that. Told her it'd save on taxes when she passed. Way I heard it, she ended up renting a room from her own brother before she died, and he had that house sold within the year." Patrice sighed. "That's just the one everybody talks about at church when they talk about it at all. Which isn't much, because you know how folks get about repeating things they can't prove. There's supposed to be a nephew too, some business deal that went bad, in a way that only seemed to go bad for the nephew. I don't know the details on that one, just what gets said." I sat with that a long moment, watching my own hand grip the phone tighter than I meant to. "He's always been that way. From what I've seen of him," Patrice went on, not noticing my silence. "Charming as anything to your face. Man could sell water to a fish. But that's just my read on him. You check your pockets after you shake his hand, is all I'm saying. You understand me?" "I understand you," I said quietly. We talked a few more minutes about nothing, church folks and grandbabies, and I let her believe the conversation had ended wherever she thought it had. When I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my tea going cold again, same as it had every day that week, and thought about how a man with even half that history didn't just show up to fix a door out of the goodness of his heart. I called Garrison that evening, told him about the mail, the keys, and finally, what Patrice had said about Ambrose. With the caveat that most of it was church talk and half-remembered stories, nothing anybody could swear to in a courtroom. Garrison went quiet on the other end of the line. Not the quiet of a man who hadn't heard something like this before, The quiet of a man deciding how much he was ready to say. "Garrison," I said, "you still there?" "I'm here." His voice had changed, gone careful in the same way Patrice's had. "Lois, I need you to tell me if he's ever done anything with Delphine's property. Anything with paperwork, refinancing, anything like that." My stomach turned cold at the question, because I didn't have an answer, and because Garrison didn't ask questions like that unless he already suspected the answer. "Why?" I asked him. "What do you know about Ambrose that you're not telling me?" He didn't answer that right away, and in the silence that stretched between us, I understood something had shifted. Ambrose Norwood was no longer just a name Patrice had warned me about, half-remembered and unprovable. He was somebody Garrison had already been watching. Garrison came by 2 nights later than he usually would. And I knew before he said a word that whatever he'd found had cost him some sleep to get. "I need you to understand something before I tell you this," he said, standing in my doorway instead of coming in. "What I'm doing right now, pulling property records on my own time, asking favors from people who owe me, none of that's official. If this goes anywhere, it goes through real channels. I need you to hear that." "I hear you," I said. "Now come in and tell me." He sat at my table, laid a folder down but didn't open it right away, like he needed a moment before the words came out of him. "Started with the addresses I already knew were his," Garrison said. "His house, the church, that little office he keeps for his side business. Ran those through the county property records, looking for anything filed under the same registered agent or the same handful of names he's used before on paperwork. Took most of the week, honestly, cross-checking names that didn't quite match until one finally did." He exhaled slow. "Ambrose owns property under a name that isn't his. An LLC, paperwork filed almost 2 years back. Nothing illegal about that on its own. Plenty of people hide behind a company name for tax reasons. But this one's got no website, no other holdings, nothing but this one address. Where? Not far. 20 minutes from Delphine's place, maybe less." He finally opened the folder, slid a printed image across to me. A small brick house, unremarkable, blinds drawn tight in every window. I drove by it myself, slow, didn't stop. No car in the driveway. No sign of anybody coming or going. The kind of place you'd pass 100 times and never think twice about. I stared at that picture a long time, at the ordinariness of it, the plain brick and the drawn blinds, and something about how unremarkable it looked frightened me more than if it had looked wrong in any way at all. "You think she's there?" I said. "I don't know that." Garrison's voice was careful, the way it always got when he wasn't ready to promise me something he couldn't prove. "I think it's a property that shouldn't exist, tied to a man who shouldn't have a reason to hide it. That's all I know for certain." I thought of Delphine then, really thought of her, not as an idea or a worry, but as my daughter, flesh and blood, somewhere behind blinds like the ones in that picture, and my hands went cold around my teacup. "What do we do with this?" I asked. "Nothing yet. I can't take an LLC filing to a detective and call it evidence. I need more before anybody official moves on this. Bank records, something connecting Ambrose directly to activity there. That takes time." Time. The word sat heavy in my chest. "How much time?" I asked him. He didn't answer that, and his silence told me more than words would have. After he left, I sat up long past midnight with that picture of the little brick house still in my mind, the drawn blinds, the empty driveway, and a feeling growing in me that every day I spent watching quietly was a day my daughter spent counting hours in a place nobody had thought to look twice at. I thought, too, of the ordinary things a person needs just to survive a day. Food, water, some way to keep clean. And hoped whoever was keeping her alive in there had at least seen to that much. Even if they'd seen to nothing else. I didn't know. Sitting there, that somewhere behind blinds just like those, my daughter was doing the same thing I was, counting. Marking days by the sound of footsteps outside a door, the shift of light through a gap in the curtains, holding on to every small detail like it might matter later, because some part of her, same as some part of me, understood that time was the one thing neither of us could afford to lose. I called Alton and told him I wanted to sit with him a while, just the two of us. No reason given beyond a grieving woman needing company. He agreed easy enough, maybe because saying no to his missing wife's mother would look worse than saying yes. I brought coffee this time instead of food, 2 cups, and set his down in front of him before I sat across the table, calm as still water. I keep replaying that night, I said, easing into it soft. The night y'all fought. I just want to understand what happened is all. A mother needs that. Wasn't much to it, Alton said, wrapping both hands around his cup. We argued. She left. I figured she'd cool off and come back like always. What were you fighting about? Money, mostly. Same as always. He shrugged. Too quick, too practiced. She gets touchy about the house, the accounts, things like that. I nodded slow, let a silence sit there the way I'd learned silence could pull more truth out of a person than any question could. Where were you? I asked, gentle as anything. After she left. That night? Here. Whole night. Waiting on her to come back. All night? All night, Lois. A flicker of impatience crossed his face, quick and gone. Why you asking me all this? Just trying to understand her state of mind before she left, I said. Detective asked me something similar, and I want to have the story straight in my head is all. I even called her job, asked if she'd said anything to anybody there before it happened. What did they tell you? That she'd sent a text the week before, asking for some time off. Said she needed a break. I watched him carefully as I said it. Nobody there thought much of it. Figured she was due some rest. He seemed to relax at that, believing I was simply confused, simply gathering pieces for my own comfort rather than testing him for cracks. It's all right, he said. I understand. It's been hard on everybody. We talked a while longer about nothing that mattered, and I let him believe the conversation had drifted somewhere safe. Then, near the end, as he was walking me toward the door, I mentioned something small, almost like an afterthought. Funny, I said. Mrs. Yancey next door told me she saw you pulling out that night, not long after Delphine left. Guess she got her nights mixed up. Alton's hand paused on the doorknob for just a second too long. She's mistaken, he said. I told you. I was here all night. Must be, I said, easy, like it didn't matter one way or the other. Old woman probably got her days confused. I thanked him for the coffee, told him to call me if he heard anything, and walked to my car without hurrying, without looking back, though every part of me wanted to. I didn't tell him Mrs. Yancey had never said any such thing to me. I'd made it up on the spot, a small test. Nothing more, just to see what a truthful man would do with an accusation that wasn't true. A truthful man corrects a mistake plainly, without a beat of hesitation. Alton had paused. I sat in my car outside his house a long moment before I started the engine, turning that pause over and over in my mind, small as it was, quiet as it was, the first real crack I'd found with my own 2 hands instead of Garrison's. I didn't call anybody that night. I didn't tell a soul what I'd noticed. I just sat with it, held it close, and understood that whatever Alton was hiding, he wasn't nearly as careful as he believed himself to be. Garrison called before sunrise, which told me right away this wasn't a conversation that could wait for a decent hour. I need to show you something, he said. Can I come by now? He was at my door within 20 minutes, and I'd never seen my brother's hands move the way they did that morning, pulling papers out of a folder like they were burning him. "Remember, I told you I couldn't take an LLC filing to anybody as evidence," he said. "That still stands. But I found something else." He laid a printed bank statement on my table, a single line highlighted in yellow. "This is Ambrose's personal account. Not the LLC, not anything hidden. His own card, his own name." He tapped the line. "Cash withdrawal, 3 weeks back, $400. Memo line just says, repair." "That's not much to go on," I said, though something in my chest had already started tightening. "On its own, no. But I made a call to a contact who does contract work around the city. Quietly asked if anybody had heard of cash jobs matching that amount around that time, that part of town." Garrison's jaw was tight. "Took him a couple days, but he found a handyman who remembered the job clear as day. Said it stuck with him because the man paying him counted out the cash twice before handing it over. Like he didn't trust himself to get it right the first time. Said the man paid him to reinforce a door and frame at a rental. Told him it was for a property he was getting ready to lease out. Even had the receipt still in his truck, one of those carbon copies contractors keep. Described Ambrose to me almost exactly, down to the watch he always wears." I sat with that a moment, picturing it. A door being reinforced, not repaired, made stronger, made harder to break through or harder to break out of. I thought, too, of what little comfort there might be behind that door, whether anyone had thought to leave more than the bare minimum to keep a person alive, and hated myself a little for not knowing the answer. "He's keeping her in there," I said, quiet, more to myself than to him. "I can't say that for certain yet." Garrison's voice was careful, but there was something underneath it now that hadn't been there before. Not doubt, but urgency. "What I can say is a man who claims he hasn't visited that property in years, just paid, in cash, under his own name, to reinforce a door on it, and there's a receipt and a witness who can put him there. That's not nothing anymore, Lois. That's a thread I can pull. Then pull it. I will. But I need this to go to Halloway, not stay between us. This is the kind of thing that needs a real detective's name on it, not mine." He gathered the papers back into the folder, careful, like they were more fragile than paper had any right to be. "I'm going to take this to him today. See if it's enough to move different than he did before." I thought of Detective Halloway's flat voice from that first visit, the folder he hadn't even bothered to open. And I wondered if $400, a signed receipt, and a stranger's memory would be enough to change a man's mind that had already been made up. And if he still says, it's not enough? Garrison didn't answer right away, and in his silence, I heard something that frightened me more than any answer could have. The truth that even now, with a name and a receipt, and a reinforced door sitting right in front of us, my daughter's safety still hung on whether the right person believed it mattered enough to act. "Then I keep pulling," Garrison said finally, "because a man like Ambrose doesn't make many mistakes. And he just made one." Garrison spread everything across my kitchen table 2 nights later, every piece of it. Like a man laying out a hand of cards he needed me to see all at once. "I want you to see the whole picture," he said. "Not pieces anymore, all of it." He started with the refinance, papers Delphine had signed almost a year back. Ambrose's name woven through the fine print in ways that gave him access to funds that should have stayed hers alone. Then the insurance policy, quietly changed 4 months before she disappeared. Alton's name where her own trust used to sit. Then the LLC, the property, the cash withdrawal, the handyman's account of a reinforced door. I sat with my hands flat on the table and let it all settle into me, piece by piece, until it stopped feeling like separate things and started feeling like one long, deliberate hand reaching for everything my daughter had. They didn't just want her gone, I said. They wanted everything that was hers first. That's what it looks like, Garrison said. Refinance before she vanished. Insurance changed before that. This wasn't panic. This was planned, piece by piece, months before that fight ever happened. Something in me went still and cold hearing that. Colder than fear. Colder than grief. It was the kind of stillness that comes right before a person stops reacting and starts deciding. What happens now? I asked. Now I take this to Holloway. Garrison began gathering the papers, squaring their edges careful as anything. Not as a favor this time, as evidence, refinance timeline, insurance change, a cash payment tied to a property Ambrose claims he hasn't touched in years. That's a financial case any detective worth his badge has to look at twice. Is it enough? He paused at that, papers halfway back into the folder. It's enough to make him listen different than he did the first time. It's enough to open something official, get eyes on that property the right way, maybe pull warrants on financial records we can't touch ourselves. His voice tightened. It's not enough yet for a search warrant on the house itself. Judge needs more than suspicious money for that. Needs something tying Ambrose directly to a person, not just a payment. So, we wait again. Not the same waiting as before. He looked at me steady. This is Holloway's waiting now. Official waiting. Different animal. I thought about that word. Waiting. And how many times I'd already swallowed it since that first phone call. I thought, too, of how many days that made now since anyone but her captors had laid eyes on her and prayed whatever they needed from her alive. They were at least seeing to it that she stayed that way. But something had shifted in me sitting at that table surrounded by refinance papers and insurance forms, something that no longer felt like a mother hoping for good news. Take it to him tomorrow, I said, not next week. Tomorrow. I was already planning tomorrow. I know you were. I met his eyes. I just needed to say it myself. I'm done being the one who only finds out things after they've already happened. Garrison studied me a moment like he was seeing something new in his sister's face, something that hadn't been there the week before. All right, he said quietly. Tomorrow then. He left with the folder tucked under his arm, and I sat alone at that table a long while after, staring at the empty space where all those papers had been spread out. Understanding for the first time that whatever came next, I would not be the same soft, waiting woman who'd answered that first phone call. Garrison called me that evening, his voice carrying something I hadn't heard from him yet through all of this, a thin thread of hope. Holloway looked at it, he said. Really looked this time, read every page. And he didn't promise me anything, but he didn't slide it back across the desk unopened either. Garrison paused, said the refinance timeline paired with the insurance change was enough to justify pulling Ambrose's financial records officially. Said if that turns up anything connecting him further to that property, it changes the conversation about a warrant. Relief moved through me, thin and careful. The kind that doesn't dare get comfortable yet. How long? I asked. Records requests take time, even when a detective's motivated. Days. Maybe longer. Garrison's voice tightened. I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing, Lois. Nothing more, nothing less. Let them believe you're still just a grieving mother waiting on news. I can do that. I'd gotten good at it. If I was honest with myself. Good at softening my face when I saw Alton. Good at asking questions that sounded like worry instead of investigation. Good at swallowing everything I now knew and letting only grief show on the surface. Some nights, I lay awake doing the arithmetic of it. How many days now? How a body holds up under that kind of stretch. Whether wherever she was, somebody was at least giving her water, letting her move, keeping her breathing steady until I could get to her. But Alton had started watching me differently. I noticed it 2 days later when I brought him another dish, another excuse to sit a while in his kitchen. He didn't relax around me the way he had those first visits. He kept glancing toward the counter where I'd once seen his father's keys, like he was making sure nothing sat out that shouldn't. "You've been coming around a lot," he said, not quite a question. "I'm worried about you," I said, "and about her." Funny. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You never used to come around much before all this. Now you're here every few days, asking all kinds of things." "She's my daughter, Alton." "I know that." His eyes didn't leave mine. "I just find it curious is all. All these questions. All this concern. All of a sudden." I kept my face soft, tired. The face of a worried mother and nothing more, though something in me had gone very alert underneath it. "I don't know what else you'd expect from me," I said. "My daughter's missing. I'd think you'd want me asking questions." "I do." His voice stayed level, but there was something new underneath it. Something colder than the performative worry he'd been giving me since that second phone call. "I just wonder sometimes what exactly you're looking for, coming around here so much." I held his gaze a moment longer than was comfortable, refusing to be the first one to look away. "I'm looking for my daughter," I said. "Same as I've been looking for her since the day you called me." He didn't answer that right away. Just studied me the way a man studies something he's no longer sure he understands. And in that silence, I felt something shift between us. The quiet, mutual understanding of two people who both suspected the other of knowing more than they were saying. "You should head home," he said finally. "Getting late." I left without hurrying, without giving him anything more to read in my face. But I sat in my car outside his house a long moment after, hands steady on the wheel, understanding clearly now that whatever careful distance I'd been keeping, Alton had started keeping the exact same distance from me. Garrison's voice had an edge to it I hadn't heard before when he called. "I think Ambrose is spooked," he said, "and I don't like why." "What happened?" "The handyman called my contact back today, nervous, asking why somebody'd been asking questions about a job he did months back. Contact played it off, but the handyman mentioned it to Ambrose anyway. Probably innocent on his part. Just making conversation, not realizing what he was stirring up." Garrison's breath came heavy through the phone. "That means Ambrose knows somebody's been asking about that property. He might not know it's us specifically, but a man like that, smart as he's been, he's not going to sit still wondering." My stomach dropped at that. "So he knows we're close. Close enough to worry him. I need you to be careful the next few days. If he's scared men make mistakes, but they also do things they wouldn't otherwise do." I thought of Delphine then, wherever she was behind those drawn blinds, and felt something cold settle over me at the thought of what a frightened man like Ambrose might decide to do to protect himself. And prayed, whatever else he did, he'd at least keep seeing to it that she had water, that she was breathing steady, that fear hadn't made him careless in the wrong direction. "What did Holloway say?" I asked. "About moving on the property?" "That's why I'm calling." Garrison's voice shifted, careful, like he was choosing to be hopeful without promising too much. "The bank records came back showing transfers between Ambrose's account and a private contractor 2 weeks before that cash withdrawal. Small amount, but it's a pattern now. Not just one payment. Combined with the LLC, the timeline, all of it. Holloway thinks he's got enough to take to a judge. Enough for a warrant. Enough to try for one. He's drafting the request now. Could be tomorrow, could be a couple days, depending on the judge's schedule." Garrison paused. "I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it from anybody else. We're close, Lois. Closer than we've been since that first phone call." I sat with that a long moment after we hung up, feeling something I hadn't let myself feel in weeks. Not hope exactly, but something standing close enough to it that my hands shook holding the phone. I didn't know, sitting there in my kitchen, that across town Ambrose had spent that same evening pacing the floor of his own home, running through in his mind every thread that could unravel him, and had made a call of his own. A call to make sure the door stayed locked a different way now, the visits shorter, the risks tightened wherever he could tighten them. And I didn't know that behind that reinforced door, my daughter had felt the shift too. Footsteps coming faster than before, voices lower, a new sharpness in the air that told her, without anyone saying a word, that something outside those walls had changed. She didn't know what. She only knew enough to understand that whatever was coming, she needed to be ready to move the moment a door opened, even a crack wider than it should. She started watching the hinges after that, started counting how many seconds passed between the turn of a key and the door swinging open, filing away every detail like a woman building a case of her own from the inside, waiting for one mistake to hand her the moment she needed. Neither of us knew, that night, just how close that moment already was. Garrison came to my house the next evening, and I knew from the set of his shoulders before he even spoke that something had moved. "Judge signed it," he said, 2 hours ago. I stood there a moment, letting those 3 words settle into me the way heavy things settle, slow and certain. "The warrant," I said, "for the property." For the property. Garrison sat down across from me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something in his face that looked almost like relief, though it was tempered with something else, something more careful. "Holloway's leading it. GBI's involved too, since it touches financial crimes across the case. Full team, done right, done legal. And you?" "I'm not on the entry team, Lois. Can't be. I gave them everything I found, walked Holloway through every piece of it, but this is his case now, his and the department's. I'll be there, but on the outside. Same as you." I nodded slowly, understanding what that meant. Understanding, too, the strange ache of relief and helplessness sitting together in my chest at once. Months of watching, of gathering, of holding my tongue and softening my face. And now, at the moment that mattered most, there was nothing left for me to do but wait. "When?" I asked. "Morning. First light, while there's the best chance of catching whoever's there off guard." Garrison reached across the table and took my hand, something he hadn't done since we were children. "I need you to stay home tomorrow. Not near that property, not near Alton's house. Let them do this the right way." "I understand." "Do you?" He studied me carefully. "Because I know you, Lois. I know what it costs you to sit still." He wasn't wrong. Every part of me wanted to be standing at that door when it opened, wanted to see my daughter's face the second she stepped back into the light. But I'd learned enough these past weeks to know that wanting something didn't make it wise, and that the surest way to keep Delphine safe now was to let the people trained for this do what they were trained to do. "I'll stay home," I said. "I'll wait." Garrison held my hand a moment longer, then stood, gathering himself the way he did before anything difficult, squaring his shoulders like a man preparing to carry something heavy. "I'll call you the second I know anything," he said. "The very second." After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen long into the night, the house quiet around me the same way it had been quiet the night this all started, phone in my lap, staring at a screen that stayed dark and silent no matter how long I watched it. I thought of every day since that first call, the casseroles, the quiet questions, the door I'd tested with a lie of my own, the folder of papers spread across this very table. All of it had led here, to this waiting, this stillness, that felt heavier than any of the moving I'd done to get to it. I thought, too, of how many mornings now she'd woken up in that place and made myself a quiet promise that whatever state I found her in tomorrow, weak or hurt or frightened, I would not let her see anything on my face but relief. Somewhere in that stillness, I thought of Delphine too. Not the frightened idea of her I'd carried those first days, but the version Garrison had described, piecing together timelines and testimony, someone who might, in the end, help build the very case that freed her. It steadied me, that thought, more than anything else could have that night. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my window instead, watching the dark sky for the first hint of morning light, knowing that somewhere across this city, a door was about to open that had stayed shut far too long. The call came just after 7 in the morning, and I had my phone in my hand before the first ring finished. "We found her." Garrison's voice cracked on those 2 words in a way I'd never heard from him before. "Lois, she's alive. She's weak, but she's alive." I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember the drive. I remember standing on a quiet street 20 minutes from my daughter's house, staring at a small brick house with its blinds still drawn. Police cars angled across the yard, an ambulance backed up the driveway, and understanding all at once why nobody had ever looked twice at this place. It looked like nothing. It looked like every other house on that street, ordinary, forgettable, the kind of address a person's eyes slid right past without ever landing. They let me through when Garrison came and got me himself, walking me past the tape, past the officers, straight to the back of the ambulance where my daughter sat wrapped in a blanket, thinner than I'd ever seen her, blinking against sunlight like she hadn't felt it properly in weeks. A paramedic knelt beside her, checking a line already taped into her arm, murmuring something about fluids and how dehydrated she was, how they'd feed her slow once they got her to the hospital. Careful, so her body could handle it. "Mama." That one word broke something in me that I'd been holding together since that first phone call. I don't remember crossing the last few feet between us. I only remember her arms around my neck, thin and shaking, and my own composure, the one I'd carried through every casserole, every quiet lie, every night of watching without watching, finally giving way all at once. "I'm here," I said, over and over, into her hair. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." The paramedics moved her to the hospital not long after, and an officer explained gently that a full statement would wait until she'd been looked at properly. She was too weak, too dehydrated, for anything more than what she could offer in fragments right then. "I counted everything," she managed, before they closed the ambulance doors. The footsteps, the locks. That was all she gave that morning, and it was enough. It wasn't until 2 days later, once color had come back into her face and the IV was gone from her arm, that she told me more. Slow. One piece at a time. The way a person hands over something fragile they're not sure is safe to let go of yet. "There was a man who came once," she said that second day, staring at her own hands, "to fix something on the door. I heard him talking about a frame, a hinge." The day after that, more came. A voice through the wall she'd recognized as Ambrose's, a routine of footsteps she'd learned to read like a clock, small mercies she hadn't expected, meals left without a word, water she'd learned to ration herself in case a day came when none did. An investigator visited her hospital room that third day, gentle and patient, and only then did she lay it all out in order. The sounds, the voices, the handyman's words about a frame and a job, matching piece by piece what Garrison had already found, turning suspicion into certainty in real time. Behind us, on that first morning at the property, I'd heard raised voices and turned to see Alton being led out in handcuffs, his face gone pale and slack in a way that looked nothing like the flat, irritated man who'd called me that first night. Ambrose came out behind him, saying something to the officers about a misunderstanding, his voice still trying for the same charm Patrice had warned me about, though nobody around him seemed to be buying it anymore. Kidnapping, one officer had said plainly to another, close enough for me to hear. Both of them. I held my daughter's hand tight through all of it. That first morning, the hospital days after, the slow return of her voice and her details and her strength. Through the strange, disorienting relief of watching the men who'd taken her finally lose control of the story they'd spent months building. "It's over," I whispered to her, that first morning and every day after. "It's over now." But even as I said it, some part of me understood that it was only the beginning of what came next. Delphine came to stay with me 2 weeks after the hospital released her, and the house that had felt so empty the night of that first phone call now felt full again, in a way I hadn't let myself imagine. The district attorney's office called on a Tuesday morning while Delphine was still asleep in her old room. I sat at my kitchen table, same table where Garrison had spread out all those papers, and listened to a woman explain, in careful, measured language, what charges were being layered onto the kidnapping counts. Theft by deception. Theft by conversion. Tied directly to the refinance and the accounts Ambrose had funneled her money through. "We'll need her involved in the civil side eventually," the woman said. "Recovering the property, the funds. That process moves separately from the criminal case." She mentioned one more thing before we hung up. That Alton's own timeline had never lined up right from the start, 10 days by his account, closer to 2 weeks by the neighbors. And that small A lie had been one of the first threads the prosecution planned to pull at trial. Along with it, she said, would come the bruise a co-worker had once noticed. The hospital visit Delphine had never spoken of to anyone. Evidence the state intended to use to show a pattern long before the kidnapping itself. I wrote everything down the way I used to write down grocery lists, careful and plain, so I'd have it right when Delphine was ready to hear it. She came into the kitchen not long after I hung up, still moving slower than she used to, still flinching some mornings at sounds that shouldn't have startled her. "Was that about the case?" she asked. "Yes." I set the notes in front of her, let her read them at her own pace. "They're charging them for the money too, not just what they did to you." She read it over twice, quiet, and I watched something harden in her expression that hadn't been there the first days home. Something closer to resolve than fear. "Good," she said. "I want it all back. Every bit they took. You'll get help doing that. A lawyer for the civil side, separate from the criminal case. Will you help me with it?" "Every step," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, then sat quiet a long moment, turning her cup of tea slow in her hands, something clearly working itself loose in her mind before she spoke again. "Mama, there's something I keep thinking about," she said. "All those weeks I was gone, I kept picturing you at home, not knowing anything, just waiting and worrying. It made it worse, thinking about you suffering, not knowing." She looked up at me. "But Garrison told me some of it. That you knew things. That you were watching them the whole time and didn't tell me you suspected. Didn't even let on to anybody. I keep wondering what that was like, carrying all that alone." I set my own cup down, considering how to answer her honestly. "It was the hardest thing I've done," I said. "Sitting across from that man, bringing him food, asking easy questions when everything in me wanted to scream. But if I'd shown one crack, if they'd suspected for 1 second I knew anything, I was scared of what they'd do to keep it hidden. To you." Delphine was quiet a moment, absorbing that. "I understand it," she said softly. "Doesn't mean it doesn't sit strange, knowing you were that close and I didn't know it." I know, baby. I know it does. She reached over and took my hand then, her grip steadier than it had been the day I found her. How did you know, she asked, to keep pushing? Everybody else was ready to believe I just left. I sat with that question a long moment, feeling the weight of everything it carried. Because I know you, I said. And a mother knows when something's wrong, even when the whole world's telling her it isn't. The courthouse hallway was cold the morning the civil judgment came down. The kind of cold that has nothing to do with the weather outside. Delphine sat beside me on that hard wooden bench, her hand steady in mine, steadier than it had been in months. When the lawyer came out and told us the ruling had gone through, every dollar traced back to Ambrose's accounts, ordered returned, the property retitled fully into her name, the refinance unwound, as if it had never happened. She didn't cry the way I expected her to. She just closed her eyes a moment, breathed out slow, like she was setting down something heavy she'd been carrying without realizing how much it weighed. "It's really mine again," she said. "It was always yours," I told her. "They just made you forget that for a while." The criminal trial was still ahead of us, dates set for both Alton and Ambrose. Kidnapping charges that carried weight enough to keep them away for a long time if the evidence held the way Garrison believed it would. But that was a fight for another season. Today was for this. The money, the property, the paper proof that what they'd stolen had a name, and that name was hers. We drove home together after, and Delphine asked me to stop by her old house on the way, the one she'd shared with Alton, now sitting empty under a bank of clouds that made the whole street look softer than I remembered it looking the day I'd first knocked on that door with a casserole in my hands. She didn't get out of the car. She just looked at it a long moment through the window. "I used to think something was wrong with me," she said quietly. "The way he talked about me sometimes, to people, behind my back. Unstable. I started to believe it a little, if I'm honest. Started to wonder if maybe I really was. Too much. Too sensitive. Too something." "You were never any of that," I said. "You were just married to a man who needed you to doubt yourself more than he needed you to trust yourself." She nodded slow, like she was letting that settle somewhere it could finally take root. "I don't feel like that woman anymore," she said. "The one everybody was ready to believe just wandered off." "You're not her," I said. "You never were." We drove home in a quiet that didn't feel heavy anymore. The kind of quiet two people can sit inside without needing to fill it with anything at all. That night, after Delphine had gone to bed, I sat by my window the way I had so many nights before. Except this time, the stillness in the house didn't ache the way it used to. I thought about that first phone call. Alton's flat voice. The words that had tried to make my daughter's absence sound like something ordinary, something she'd chosen. I thought about every quiet lie I'd told to keep myself close enough to watch, every casserole, every soft question hiding something sharper underneath. I had spent so many years being the kind of woman people underestimated, quiet, composed, easy to overlook. It turned out that was exactly the kind of woman they should have been afraid of all along. I wasn't the one who left, and I wasn't the one who stayed silent when it counted. I was the one who found her,